Stepmother burned my late mom's belongings, but her shocking secret got her arrested. The smell of smoke hit me the moment I stepped into the house. It wasn't the cozy kind from a fireplace. It was sharp, acrid, and wrong. My heart sank as I dropped my bag and rushed toward the backyard. That's when I saw it. A metal barrel, charred black at the edges, still smoldering. Ashes floated in the air, settling onto the patio like a grim snowfall. And standing there with a triumphant look on her face was Karen, my stepmother, holding a long metal poker like some twisted queen surveying her kingdom. "What are you doing?" I shouted, my voice shaking. Karen turned, her smile calm and unbothered. "Oh, you're home. Good timing. I just finished." "Finished what?" I demanded, stepping closer. That's when I noticed something horrifying. Fragments of fabric, a scorched photo frame, and bits of porcelain. What was left of my mom's favorite vase, peeking out from the ashes. Karen didn't hesitate, cleaning up the clutter. "Your dad and I thought it was time to move on." My chest tightened, and I struggled to find words. "You burned mom's things?" Karen rolled her eyes, as if I were the unreasonable one. "It's not like anyone was using them. Honestly, Emily, keeping all that stuff around wasn't healthy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom's belongings weren't stuff. They were memories, pieces of her life that I had clung to after she passed. "Does Dad know about this?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Karen smirked. "I know your dad better than you do. He'll thank me for this once he sees how much cleaner the house feels." Her words sent a wave of rage through me. I stormed past her into the house, desperate to find any shred of my mom's things that might have been spared. But as I tore through the living room, the attic, and the sewing room, it became painfully clear. Karen had been thorough. Everything was gone. When I couldn't find anything, I collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down my face. Karen sauntered in, leaning against the doorframe with a satisfied expression. "You'll see," she said. "This is for the best. You'll thank me someday." I looked up at her, my fists clenched. "You had no right." She shrugged. "Your dad and I are building a new life together. That's what your mom would have wanted." Her audacity was staggering. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I pushed past her and went straight to my dad's study. Dad was on a work call when I barged in, but the look on my face must have told him everything. He quickly ended the call and stood up. "Emily, what's wrong?" I pointed toward the backyard, my voice shaking. "Karen burned all of Mom's things. Did you know about this?" His face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Karen appeared in the doorway, her expression suddenly soft and innocent. "Oh, John, don't let her upset you. We talked about this, remember? It was time to let go." Dad looked between us, clearly confused. "I never agreed to anything like that." Karen's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of frustration crossing her face. "John, we discussed moving forward, starting fresh. I thought you'd be happy I took the initiative. That doesn't mean destroying everything." Dad's voice was firm, and for the first time, I saw Karen falter. She quickly shifted tactics, her eyes filling with tears. "I was only trying to help. I thought it would be good for Emily, too. Holding on to the past isn't healthy for any of us." I couldn't believe her audacity. "You think burning everything Mom left behind is helping?" I snapped. Dad ran a hand through his hair, clearly overwhelmed. "Karen, we need to talk about this later." "Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was going to do this." But his apology wasn't enough to calm the storm brewing inside me. That night, while Karen retreated to their bedroom, I searched the house for anything that might have escaped her purge. I checked every closet, every drawer, and every corner of the attic. Just when I was ready to give up, I found it. A small box tucked away in the basement, hidden behind an old stack of magazines. Inside were a few of Mom's belongings, a pair of earrings, a faded photo, and a notebook with her handwriting on the cover. I flipped open the notebook, desperate for some connection to her. On the inside cover, written in her elegant script, was a note that sent chills down my spine. "If you're reading this, Emily, it means something is wrong. Keep this safe, and trust no one who tries to take it from you." I clutched the notebook to my chest, my mind racing. Karen had destroyed almost everything, but somehow this had been spared. Why? And what did Mom mean by trust no one? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. Karen wasn't just trying to erase Mom's memory. There was something more to her actions, something I needed to uncover. The notebook felt heavier than it should have as I clutched it on my way back to my room. I locked the door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. The entry started off innocently enough. Everyday thoughts, notes about family life, and reflections on the milestones Mom had shared with me and Dad. But as I read further, the tone began to shift. One entry, dated just a few months before her passing, stood out. I've noticed something off with John lately. He's more distant, quieter. It's not like him. And Karen, there's something about her I can't put my finger on. She's overly helpful, overly interested in things that don't concern her. I feel like I'm being edged out of my own life. My stomach churned as I continued reading. Today, I caught Karen in my sewing room. She said she was just looking for scissors, but I know that's a lie. She's always snooping, always hovering. I'm starting to wonder if she's waiting for me to disappear. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Had Mom suspected Karen of something? Was there more to her illness than we knew? I kept flipping through the notebook, but many of the later entries were either vague or incomplete, as if Mom had been too tired or too scared to write everything down. Toward the end of the notebook, a single page stood out. It wasn't like the others. Instead of her neat handwriting, it was scrawled hastily, almost illegible. Emily, if anything happens to me, you need to look in the attic. There's a hidden compartment under the floorboards near the window. Everything you need to know is there. I stared at the page, my heart racing. A hidden compartment? What could she have possibly left there? I waited until the house was quiet, the faint sound of Dad's snoring filtering through the walls. Karen's room was silent, but I wasn't about to trust she was asleep. Grabbing my phone for light, I slipped out of my room and tiptoed toward the attic. The air grew colder as I climbed the creaky stairs. The attic smelled musty, like old wood and forgotten memories. I made my way to the window Mom had mentioned, crouching down to examine the floorboards. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then I noticed a feint seen between two planks. Using a screwdriver I'd brought along, I pried them apart, revealing a small compartment beneath. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, and a small velvet pouch. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were several folded papers, along with a photograph I didn't recognize. It showed my mom standing next to a man I'd never seen before, a man who wasn't my dad. The back of the photo had a note scrawled in Mom's handwriting, "For Emily. When you're ready to understand." I unfolded the papers, and my blood ran cold. They were legal documents, an unsigned will, medical records, and a paternity test. The will stated that everything Mom owned should go to me, explicitly excluding Karen. But it was the medical records and paternity test that shocked me the most. The records indicated that Mom had been diagnosed months before she told us, but there were inconsistencies, notes about symptoms that didn't align with her official diagnosis. And the paternity test, it named the man in the photo as my biological father. I sat there, stunned, as the pieces started to fall into place. Had Mom known she was in danger? Had Karen played a role in her illness? And what about my real father? The sound of footsteps jolted me out of my thoughts. Someone was coming up the attic stairs. I barely had time to stuff the papers and photo back into the envelope before Karen appeared at the top of the staircase, her face eerily calm. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I could say the same for you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the attic. "Looking for something, Emily?" I forced a shrug. "Just reminiscing." Karen's gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, then shifted to the area near the window. I could tell she knew something was up. "Well," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp, "don't stay up too late. You need your rest." I nodded, clutching the envelope tightly as she turned and descended the stairs. The moment she was gone, I knew I had to act fast. Whatever Mom had left behind, it was clear Karen couldn't know I had found it. I tucked the envelope and pouch into my bag, resolving to examine them further when I was safely away from Karen's prying eyes. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought consumed me. Karen wasn't just trying to erase Mom's memory. She was hiding something that could change everything I thought I knew about my family, and I was going to find out what it was. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still racing from the discoveries of the night before. The envelope and velvet pouch were hidden in my bag, and I couldn't risk Karen finding them. I decided I'd need time away from the house to piece everything together. Heading out early? Karen's voice startled me as I reached for the front door. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, her sharp eyes watching me like a hawk. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just need some fresh air." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her silence unnerving. Once outside, I drove to the nearest park, parking in a secluded area. With trembling hands, I pulled out the envelope and the velvet pouch. First, I opened the pouch. Inside was a small locket, delicate and tarnished, with an engraving on the back, "To my beloved daughter." I opened it to find two tiny photos, one of my mom and one of the man from the photograph, my real father. My chest tightened as I tried to imagine what Mom's life must have been like, keeping this secret for so long. Next, I unfolded the papers from the envelope, focusing on the medical records. Something about the timeline didn't sit right with me. According to the records, Mom's symptoms had started 6 months before her diagnosis, but her personal notes in the journal suggested they began earlier. One line in particular caught my attention. Patient reported rapid onset of symptoms following accidental exposure to household chemicals. Household chemicals? I couldn't recall any accidents Mom had mentioned, but Karen had been around a lot back then, always helping out in the kitchen, the garden, and the laundry room. My stomach churned at the thought. I moved on to the unsigned will. It detailed Mom's wishes clearly, leaving everything to me, with strict instructions to exclude Karen from any inheritance. Why hadn't it been signed? And why hadn't Dad followed through with these instructions? The questions piled up, and I felt a growing urgency to confront Dad. When I returned home, Dad was in his study, reviewing some documents. I hesitated at the door, unsure how to start the conversation. "Dad?" I said, stepping inside. He looked up, smiling tiredly. "Hey, kiddo. What's up?" I took a deep breath and closed the door behind me. "I need to ask you something about Mom." His smile faded, replaced by a wary expression. "What about her?" I handed him the photograph from the envelope. His face went pale the moment he saw it. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom left it for me," I said. "She also left a notebook and some papers." "Dad, who is this man? Is he my biological father?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "Emily, it's complicated. Try me," I pressed, my voice firmer than I expected. Dad sighed deeply, sinking into his chair. "Your mom and I went through a rough patch before you were born. We separated for a while, and during that time, she met someone else. When we got back together, she found out she was pregnant. She told me the truth, but we decided to raise you as mine." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So you knew all along?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "But you're my daughter, Emily. That's all that's ever mattered to me." I struggled to process his confession, but there was still more to uncover. What about the will? Mom left instructions to keep Karen out of everything. Why didn't you follow them? Dad's expression darkened. The will was never finalized. Karen, she convinced me it wasn't necessary. Said we'd handle things together as a family. My anger flared. And you believed her? She burned everything of Mom's, Dad. Everything. And now I'm starting to think she's been hiding more than just her hatred for Mom's memory. Dad looked genuinely shocked. She did what? She burned Mom's belongings while I was in the hospital, I said, my voice trembling. And she claimed you'd be happy about it. He stood abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. I didn't agree to any of that. Emily, I promise, I'll talk to her. But I wasn't convinced. Karen had manipulated Dad once before, and I wasn't going to let her do it again. Before you do, I said, there's something else. Mom's medical records. They mentioned an exposure to household chemicals. Did anything unusual happen before she got sick? Dad frowned, thinking back. There was an incident, a bottle of cleaning solution spilled in the laundry room. Your mom said it gave her a terrible headache, but we didn't think much of it at the time. Who was there when it happened? I asked, my heart pounding. Karen, he said slowly. She was helping out that day. The pieces clicked into place, and my blood ran cold. Dad, I think Karen had something to do with Mom's illness. His eyes widened in disbelief. Emily, that's a serious accusation. I know, I said, but think about it. She's been trying to erase Mom's memory ever since she passed. And now, after finding all this, I'm starting to think it wasn't an accident. Dad sank back into his chair, his face pale. If you're right, we need proof. I nodded, determination hardening in my chest. Then we find it. That night, I began devising a plan to uncover the truth about Karen. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning, and that whatever we discovered next would change our lives forever. I spent the next day on edge, carefully observing Karen's every move while trying to act normal. Dad and I hadn't spoken much since our conversation in his study, but I could tell he was grappling with the weight of what I'd revealed. Karen, on the other hand, seemed as composed as ever, humming to herself while arranging flowers in the dining room or preparing elaborate meals. The facade she wore so effortlessly now seemed sinister to me, a mask hiding whatever dark truths lay beneath. That evening, when Karen left to run errands, I saw my chance. Dad, I said quietly, finding him in the living room, we need to search Karen's room. He looked at me, torn. Emily, that feels wrong. I crossed my arms. You said we need proof. Do you want to know the truth or not? He hesitated, but eventually nodded. Together, we climbed the stairs to Karen's room, my heart pounding louder with each step. Her room was pristine, almost unnervingly so. Every item was perfectly arranged, her bed immaculately made. It didn't take long to find her locked desk drawer. Do you have a key? I asked. No, Dad admitted, glancing nervously at the door. But I can try to force it open. He grabbed a small screwdriver and went to work on the lock. After a few tense minutes, the drawer popped open, revealing a neat stack of papers and a few personal items. We sifted through the contents quickly, my pulse racing with each discovery. Most of it seemed harmless, bills, receipts, and stationery, until I pulled out a small notebook. What's this? I murmured, flipping it open. The entries inside were brief but chilling. One read, "It's almost done. She's weaker every day. John doesn't suspect a thing." Another, "Had to be careful today. Emily nearly caught me in the laundry room, but I think she's too sick to notice." And then, "Once she's gone, everything will be perfect. I'll finally have the life I deserve." I felt sick to my stomach. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough. We needed more, something undeniable. Dad's face was pale as he read over my shoulder. "I can't believe this," he whispered. She planned this." I put the notebook in my bag, determined to take it somewhere safe. "We need to find out how far this goes," I said. Dad nodded, his expression grim. "I'll confront her when she gets back." "No," I said quickly. "We can't tip her off. If she realizes we know, she might destroy any other evidence. Let me handle this." He looked reluctant, but finally agreed. That night, after Karen returned home, I slipped out with the notebook and Mom's papers. I drove to the only person I trusted outside the family, Aunt Susan, Mom's older sister. Susan's face turned ashen as I showed her what I'd found. "Emily, this is monstrous," she said, her voice trembling. "Your mother suspected something, but I had no idea it was this bad." "She wrote in her journal about being afraid of Karen," I said, "and these entries prove she was involved in Mom's illness." Susan took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We need to take this to someone who can help, lawyers, investigators. But you have to be careful, Emily. If Karen finds out, she won't hesitate to cover her tracks." Over the next few days, Susan and I began piecing together a plan. We contacted a private investigator who agreed to look into Karen's background. What he found shocked us even more. Karen had a history of latching onto wealthy families, ingratiating herself before manipulating her way into their lives. There were whispers of lawsuits, estranged relatives, and even allegations of theft, all buried under non-disclosure agreements. She's a professional manipulator, the investigator told us. And she's careful. But with this journal and her connection to your mother's illness, we might have enough to expose her. Back at home, I kept my guard up around Karen, pretending everything was normal. But she must have sensed something was off. One evening, as I was leaving for Susan's house, Karen stopped me at the door. "Where are you going so late?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Just meeting a friend," I said, forcing a smile. She tilted her head, studying me. "You've been acting strange lately, Emily. Is everything all right?" I shrugged. Just a lot on my mind. Karen's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, if there's anything you want to talk about, you know I'm here for you." As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen knew more than she was letting on. When I arrived at Susan's, the investigator was waiting for us with new information. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "Karen's financial records show unusual purchases around the time your mother's illness started. Cleaning chemicals, lab-grade substances, things that don't align with her usual spending habits." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "So she poisoned Mom?" "It's highly likely," he said, "but proving it will take more evidence." Susan put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Emily. Your mom deserves justice." But just as we were finalizing our next steps, my phone buzzed with a message from Dad. "Karen's acting strange. She asked me if you've been sneaking around. Be careful." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. Karen was on to me, and I didn't know how much time we had left before she made her next move. The tension at home was unbearable. Karen's pleasant demeanor had grown brittle, her smiles forced, and her words laced with veiled suspicion. Dad was caught in the middle, growing more withdrawn each day. The pressure was building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen made her move. Susan and I worked frantically with the investigator, determined to gather the final pieces of evidence. The private investigator uncovered records that linked Karen to a series of suspicious incidents in her past, patterns of illness and estrangement in the family she became part of, all coinciding with significant financial gains for her. One night, while Dad was out and Karen was in the kitchen, I received a message from the investigator. "Meet me tomorrow. I found something big. Bring your aunt." My heart raced. This was it, the breakthrough we needed. But as I glanced up from my phone, I saw Karen standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me. "Who are you texting so late?" she asked, her voice sweet but her tone cutting. "Just a friend," I lied, slipping my phone into my pocket. Karen's gaze lingered for a moment before she turned and walked away. The next day, I met Susan and the investigator in a quiet cafe. He handed me a folder filled with damning evidence. Correspondence between Karen and a shady pharmacist, dated receipts for untraceable poisons, and, most chilling of all, an anonymous email Karen had sent discussing finalizing the plan, around the time my mother's health began to decline. "This is enough to take to the authorities," the investigator said, "but you'll need to act quickly. If she suspects anything, she might try to run. Or worse." Susan nodded firmly. "We'll take care of it." That evening, I returned home to find Karen waiting for me in the living room. The lights were dim, and she held a glass of wine in her hand, swirling it absently. "You've been awfully busy lately," she said, her tone light but her expression icy. "Anything I should know about?" I felt my stomach churn but forced a casual smile. "Just catching up with friends and helping Aunt Susan with some errands." Karen raised an eyebrow. "You're very close to your aunt these days. Funny, considering she and your father don't see eye to eye." I shrugged, feigning indifference. "She's family." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she set her glass down with deliberate precision. "Emily, I hope you know you can trust me. I've always wanted what's best for you and your father." The words felt like a veiled threat. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of fear building inside me. "I know that." But as I turned to leave the room, she spoke again, her voice sharper. "Just be careful, Emily. Sometimes people who seem like they're on your side aren't as loyal as they appear." I hurried upstairs, my heart pounding. Karen knew something. How much? I couldn't tell. I locked my door and called Susan, explaining the interaction. "We can't wait," Susan said. "Take the evidence to the police tonight. I'll meet you there." Gathering the folder and Karen's incriminating journal, I slipped out of the house quietly, but as I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Going somewhere? Karen's voice was cold, devoid of its usual pretense. I froze, clutching the folder tightly. "Just out for a drive." Karen stepped closer, her expression venomous. "You've been snooping around, haven't you? Digging into things you don't understand." I took a step back, my mind racing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," she hissed. "You've been working with your aunt, haven't you? You think you can turn my family against me?" "It's not your family," I snapped, unable to hold back. "You've been lying to us, manipulating us. Dad deserves to know the truth." Karen's face twisted with fury. "You little brat. You think you can ruin everything I've built? You're just like your mother, weak and naive." Before I could respond, Karen lunged at me, grabbing the folder. We struggled briefly, but I managed to push her away and run to my car, slamming the door and locking it as she banged on the window, screaming. Tears streaming down my face, I drove straight to the police station. Susan was already there, waiting with the investigator. Together, we handed over the evidence and recounted everything Karen had done. The officers assured us they would act quickly. The next morning, the police arrived at the house with a warrant. Karen's facade crumbled as they escorted her out in handcuffs. Dad stood in the doorway, devastated but silent. Inside, they found more evidence: hidden vials, notes, and even a stash of cash Karen had siphoned from Dad's accounts. As she was driven away, Karen glared at me through the car window, her eyes burning with hatred. In the days that followed, Dad and I began to rebuild our lives, though the scars of Karen's betrayal ran deep. Susan and I grew closer, finding solace in our shared memories of Mom. But late at night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's story wasn't over. One day, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sentence, written in Karen's familiar handwriting. "This isn't the end, Emily.